Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm Z.S. Caravallo from ZK Research, and I'm joined today by a new Zcaster, Juanita Coley. You're with Solid Rock Consulting. Juanita, delighted to have you on. You're also known as the Contact Center Whisperer. I've seen you in a ton of shows. First time on ZKast, so
Yeah, I made it. I made it to the ZKast. I made it to the ZKast. I'm like, Mama, I made it. I'm
so,
excited. No, seriously, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to come on.
and you are one of the leading experts in contact center and all things CX. We're going to talk about that, what we saw in 24, what we saw in expect in 25. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Juanita Coley, and what do you do?
Oh man, Zias, that'll be the whole episode,
I'll keep it
so
short.
just the snippet version, right? So, like you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Solid Rock Consulting. I'm affectionately known as the Contact Center Whisperer or that WFM girl. How I got that name, I started off in the contact center. We called it just the call center at the time, right?
Yeah.
So I started off in the call center as an agent on the phones. I picked up a Blue Pumpkin book. So I was a teen mom reading this Blue Pumpkin user guide in the call center. And I was like, man, this is powerful stuff. I had the presence of mind to really kind of pick up that, oh, this is how the contact center or the call center works. And so I was just smitten with it. I'm kind of a geek, so those type of things interest me. And so I read the user guide and fell in love with the workforce management, which took me on this crazy journey, diving into all things contact center, agent experience or employee experience, all those different things. And the rest is really history. I went on to work in organizations like your United Healthcares, your Liberty Medicals, companies ones you don't know, working in their workforce departments, and really just fell in love with all things workforce contact center, employee experience, customer experience. And here today, Solid Rock, we are 12 years old.
12 years.
And I know it's, people say, wow. I'm like, yeah, it's like kind of like the preteen though. You know how you got that preteen in your house that's kind of, they can cook and clean for themselves, but they still kind of get on your nerve a little bit. Like that that's the phase we are in. And so all things workforce management and helping organizations really bridge that gap between customer experience, their goals around customer experience, customer journey mapping, and how do we actually make that a realistic thing with our workforce that we have today, be it human workforce or whether today, we're seeing a lot of AI in the workforce. So
Yeah.
we help organizations bridge that gap.
So let's talk about that. So before we get into 25, let's take a look back to what we saw in 24. It was a big year in our industry, right? A lot changed. There was a lot of AI, at least a lot of chatter about AI. What were the things that you found most interesting in 24? And you start, and then I'll throw my thoughts in.
Yeah, I think some of the things that I saw that was interesting most to me is really how we've been seeing AI make its way more into the hands of consumers. So if you ask a workforce management person, a true workforce management person about AI, they're going to be like, this is not new, right? These are things like when we think about via CMS, or we think about some of the telephony platforms, they've been doing some automation and these AI things for quite some time. But what I think is interesting to me about 2020, 2021, 2023, and 24 is that as AI makes its way more mainstream to consumer, we're starting to see a push from the suppliers like our ZKast and our WFM platforms really talk about, okay, how do we materialize this into an outcome? And so some of those things have been, better routing or AI handling parts of the interaction that are coming into the contact center. And so I think that has been really interesting to me, how suppliers are putting more of a focus on outcomes rather than it being something that's just been reserved for the big box organizations. I think that has been really interesting to see that evolve.
Yeah, I think to me, 2024 was the year AI became real. While we talked about it a lot, we didn't see a lot of really good use cases. And I think it was a bit of a transition year for it. So,
Mhm.
uh, we had a bunch of stuff that we had talked about that became real. And then there's a bunch of new stuff that we started talking about that isn't quite real yet. But to your point, I think AI is very commonly used, now for call routing. In fact, I can't imagine doing routing without AI. It's just a
Right.
better way to do it. That's not really, game changing, I suppose. It's just a better way to do it. More and more companies are using it for things like to help automate a lot of the mundane tasks that agents have to do. Call summaries. I mean, who does call summaries well? I mean, that's nobody likes doing those things, right?
Right,
Uh,
right,
and
right.
and there's a handful of brands that are now using it for simple requests, things like that. One of the more interesting things I think we saw though was the rise of the virtual agent. You saw the demos that Google did, Cisco did at WebEx, where you actually had a real, you can have a conversation with a virtual agent. Uh, I don't know any brand that's actually rolled that out yet, or trusted to the degree where they want to put it in front of customers. But there's certainly a lot of experimenting with it. We saw it used for agent assist, and I think the way I characterize it is, and this is very common with the adoption of tech, right? Is that we use it to kind of improve the things that we're doing before we think about how it changes the way we do it. And so today AI has been used a lot, just make agents more efficient, help contact center managers manage better, because if I've got a distributed set of agents, I can't be listening to every call, right? And get more accurate CSAT scores and automate the mundane. And now I think, we're starting to see some interesting use cases of things that you couldn't do before, like with virtual agents and things. So
Yeah.
it was a pretty interesting year.
And even to that point, I think what we started to see more in 2024 is that we were leveraging AI, or we begin to leverage AI to help the individual, like the employee, and rather than necessarily the end user, like the actual customer. Right. And so as we're starting to implement AI, we're starting to say, okay, how does this AI help the actual, like what you said, how do we help the actual employee do their job better, more effectively, more efficiently? And what I think we're going to what we're going to begin to see is how do we actually leverage AI to actually start to help the end user, right? As opposed to so much the actual
Yeah.
employee. So we'll
Yeah.
have both. We'll have both as use cases now.
Are there any moments that like are big aha moments, sort of like if I had to ask you what your favorite moment of 2024 was, can you remember that?
As it relates to AI or just in
Yeah.
general?
No, just within our industry, if I ask you what was the highlight of 2024, is there one moment that sticks in your mind? I'll tell you mine was App WebEx one, when they demoed the virtual agent, and the person talking to the virtual agent actually interrupted the agent, and the agent was able to actually pivot, have a different
Yeah,
conversation, and you could talk to it like you were talking to a person. And
yeah.
I think that's a seminal moment for AI, because now it's not an experience that's it's on par with people, not markedly worse like we've seen before.
Yeah, it's very conversational, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that that is so chef's kiss because it's how people actually engage and conversate. Like, I have to be super patient when I'm doing talks like this because I'm like, don't interrupt, don't interrupt.
Yeah.
But so it's instinctive to like want to jump in and say, yeah, Zias, that's exactly right, or whatever. And so with AI, you're now able to kind of have that conversational tone and that conversation track, and prior, that would just destroy the system, right? Like, what are you saying? I don't understand. Please
Yeah.
press zero, And so now you can have that conversation. I think for me, right, the big thing, my moment that was like, and again, I'm so geekish, so don't take this for anything other than what it is. Mine's was when I saw so Varen Engage, they released these bots that could turn the data into a actual PowerPoint presentation. And
Mm.
I'll tell you why that was just so chef's kiss to me, because I'm sitting there thinking about my workforce management days when I, a senior leader would ask me for a report and say, hey, can you tell me dot, 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 this data point, this data point. And I would have to spend forever putting together this presentation, digging up all this data. So hours it could be possibly to put this presentation together, that now at a press of a button, not only do I have the data points at my fingertip, but it creates it as a PowerPoint for me. Like, that is insane to me, because you've done two things. You've not only pulled the information, but now I don't have to be a graphic designer, right? I don't have to be a PowerPoint guru to put these insights at the fingertips of executives. And so I'm just thinking about the time that would have saved me as a workforce analyst back in the day of having to put those together. But I definitely, absolutely, I love the conversational AI, the language transcription. I saw this too. I think it was at Enterprise Connect.
Mhm.
I don't remember the actual vendor it was, but they had, all these multiple language, so natural language processing that was transcribing what I was saying maybe in English to, 50 different languages. So the customer was hearing it in their actual language, even though I was speaking one language. So I thought that was super.
Yeah, well, it's game changing. Okay, so let's look at the 25. What are some of the things you're expecting to see? Or give me one thing, and then let's go back and forth on that.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm expecting to see for sure, and I think we're already seeing this, but I think it's going to intensify. So I think we'll see some intensification around how consumers expect, right? So this is not the business saying, hey, to the consumer, we have AI or we have this. I think consumers' expectation of AI and self-service is going to go through the roof. Right. So it's one thing, I think, for businesses to say, hey, we're wanting to improve our customer experience and so forth and so on. And so we're going to compete on customer experience by having AI and these efficiencies. I think it's another for consumers to be actively expecting you to have this. And as an expectation, they are looking at who they're going to do business with. And so the reason I'm saying that, the reason I think that consumers' expectation is going to drastically go through the roof is because we're starting to see this now with like drive-throughs. I was at don't judge me, okay? I'm going on a diet, but I was at Checkers, which in Florida is I
I
think up
like
north
checkers.
like O'Reilly's, right? So I was
Yeah.
at Checkers with my kids, and normally you go through the drive-through and you get asked what your order is, and it's a human, all the different things. Well, the drive-through was completely automated. It wasn't like a person who was saying such and such such. The drive-through was completely
Hmm.
automated. Get through the pickup window, and the person is now giving me my order, all the different things. And I thought to myself in that moment, man, how efficient that was, and how it wasn't any glitches, it wasn't any of those different things. And I was saying, man, I wonder how many more fast food restaurants are going to adopt this order taking process. And now at the window, when I pick up my food, it's just a person handing me my meal. Right. And so I actually asked the person at the window, I was like, hey, do you know what system you guys are using for the order? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, a part of your job is now this system that's taking my order. You don't know what that is. And they were like, oh, I never thought about it. I was like, yeah, I want to check
I don't
into
think
that.
that person's going to know.
Yeah, they probably didn't, but I was just so fascinated by that. We're seeing this at, in the airport where go and you're checking out, and you don't even have to check out like with the automated system. It's just scanning you as you walk out the store. And I'm like, man, so a lot of consumers are, because again, this AI is now consumer level, right? This is not just how businesses do
Yeah.
business to automate and gain efficiencies. This is how consumers are engaging with self-service and AI. And I think this is going to become an expectation because it's going to make consumers' lives that much easier, and they can go on about their way that much quicker. So I think that that's going to drive vendors, and it's going to drive businesses to have to focus really on outcomes rather than just the technology for the technology's sake.
Yeah, my prediction is similar to that, actually. It's just that the consumer acceptance of AI goes through the roof to the point where I think there's a chance next year you could see when people call a contact center and they get a human, they go, I'd rather just talk to an agent, a virtual agent. And it's funny because I've asked a bunch of brands this question, do you think we're close to that point? And they all said no. But then I roll back the clock to the early days of like mobile banking and online banking and ATMs, where people said no one would ever do that. I remember people saying, that's crazy. Who would deposit a check through your mobile phone, or who would go to put cash into an ATM when you
Right.
could just go in the bank and do it with the person? Now
Right.
the thought of not doing that is just unfathomable, right? You
Right.
wouldn't
It's
do
like
it.
people get an
Yeah.
attitude almost like, I got to get out my car and go into the bank. What are you thinking? Like, why can't I just deposit the check via my phone? Right. So the expectation from
Yeah.
consumers are going to drastically
And I
rise. Right. Go
and
ahead.
I was
Sorry.
saying I think that, like I said, the experience between virtual agents and human agents is getting um to the point where it's indistinguishable with two different factors. The first one is you're never put on hold, right, with the virtual agent, where with the human you are. And the second one is, in general, the virtual agent is going to come back with the information faster. And I think that's important. And where I think we're hitting this tipping point is because companies now have a better handle on their data. And so I've always said the best experience, like um, Gaurav Pasi, the CEO of this little startup called Zingli, he coined this term called FORO, which is, with contact centers, is a fear of reaching out. That whenever
Mhm.
you're dealing with something, the last thing you want to do is to call the contact center because it's such a bad experience, right? Now, the interactions you do like, though, is when you call up your local car dealer and you get the person you always deal with. Or for me, it's my bike store guy, right? He knows everything about my bikes and I can call him up. But if he's not there, I don't call him. Now, what if the virtual agent could take all this data on you and give you that level of experience as that person that at that, the retail store, the dealership, the sports company, the hotel, whatever, and give you that same level of experience. Now you're going to prefer that to just the generic person you get. And I think that's a really interesting shift we're going to see, is if to your point, if the demand from consumers gets so great, that virtual AI, that even though brands maybe aren't ready for it or want to be a little more cautious, it pushes them into that to make sure that they're able to do, to offer that up. And that would be a pretty interesting that would be a pretty interesting pivot. So with that, Juanita, one question I get all the time is, what happens to agents? Do agents go away? Do we compress them? Do they turn into something else? What do you advise your
I
customers?
I
Yeah.
think that agents, all right. So I'm always asked this question because I'm an advocate for agents, right? Like, and so I'm always asked this question. I fundamentally do not believe that agents go away. But I think how we think of an agent changes. What we consider an agent changes. Like, so agent is no longer the role that simply and I'm using simply just for a lack of better words, right? Simply picks up the phone and answers a basic question, right? Like, oh, how do I get directions here? Or, hey, what's my balance? Or, hey, how do I return this, right? I think an agent now, how we define an agent is completely different. This is someone who has the ability to sell on behalf of the customer, on behalf of the company, speak on behalf of the company. They are empowered with such information, right? That they are, in essence, part stakeholder in the business. They are another level of a CEO, a CFO, a operations person. I think that the role of the agent drastically changes. It's not just these low level or entry level type of interactions that they're handling. I think that they are active participant in the business growth and part business owner, if you will. Like, they are we take entrepreneur, we've heard this term before. We take entrepreneur to the completely next level. When we think about how AI empowers the agent, you truly have a person who, just for the sake of not wanting to be an entrepreneur, really becomes an entrepreneur in the business to really drive business results, change direction of the company. They have more stake. Why? Because they're not spending their time doing balance inquiries or doing things that AI could possibly do for them. They're really strategically thinking about, okay, how do I help? How does my role help drive the success of the company? And so I think the way we think about agents will drastically change, is my opinion.
Yeah, and this is where I'm not sure about what those jobs look like.
Mhm.
And I suppose if I did, then I'd probably go start a VC and create something around that. But I do know that the World Economic Forum last year said that AI would eliminate, these aren't obviously CX jobs, but they're all jobs, 85 million jobs, and create almost 100 million. So there'll be a net increase in jobs. I think back to the transition the internet went through. when, if you remember, buying a plane ticket, you used to have to go to some kiosk in the middle of the city, find the United kiosk and go in there and buy your paper ticket, right? And when it went online, everyone was afraid that those jobs would go away, and they did. All those jobs are gone. You don't see those kiosks around anymore. But the ability to buy air tickets got so much easier that the volume of people flying went through the roof, and it created a whole bunch of other jobs. Online support people, call centers actually flourished because now everyone's having online issues and they got to call in and they're making changes to flights because the volume went up. So I do believe AI is going to create a better experience with brands, more intimate experience. People will gravitate to those brands they like more, which will create more jobs in the back end. I think the contact center agent job, though, does fundamentally shift. But what that looks like on the back end and how many we need, I'm not sure. I do think the traditional agent, though, to your point, I think the number of those goes down by quite a bit. And so I think one of the important things for brands, though, is to make sure they can retrain those agents into whatever the next version of this is. I just haven't really seen what that is yet, and I don't think we're going to know what they are until we get into this, right?
Yeah, which that's my second prediction, right? So my
Yeah.
second prediction is around the way we work is going to fundamentally shift, just like what you're talking about like purchasing tickets. While those jobs went away, you best believe it created a completely different way in how we work, like how those people who were responsible sitting at the kiosk, fulfilling ticket orders, how they worked and how we purchased tickets, how that shifted. I think there's going to be a shift in the dynamic of what the future of work looks like. And so as a byproduct of that, I've been talking about job mapping, right? And so because the future of work changes, we're going to have to map roles and jobs differently, which means we're going to have to think about, okay, if this is my AI part of resource, right? Because human resources, HR has always been human resources, but now we no longer, we don't only have human resources, we have artificial resources. So we have HR and AR, right? And we're not talking about analyst relations, right? So we're talking about, artificial resources as well. And so now I have to think about, okay, if I have AR, artificial resource, as a part of my workforce, so AR and HR, how do I map this role to be able to fulfill whatever the outcome is? And so I think the way we work shifts. And so we'll have job mapping that changes the type of roles. And again, like you said, we have to now empower agents, whatever that agent looks like, to be able to be successful in that type of role. And so I think future of work will change dynamically.
Yeah, I think next year too, and I guess my prediction is kind of related to that, is that we'll reset expectations of what companies expect from their employees. Certainly in the contact center, but also other areas too. I think if AI saves you time, right? The question is, what do you do with that time? And I think right now what happens is, people they're working, they can take Friday afternoons off or whatever, and we haven't really adjusted people's goals. And so if I'm a customer, success person, or I work in a contact center, or and I'm handling X number of calls or tickets or something during the day, but now my call summaries are being done for me, then the expectation is I should be able to handle more. And I think we're going to see productivity go up, actually, which is beneficial to everybody. But I don't think we've reset those goals yet. And I think that's one of the byproducts of this. And I think, you can look at that skeptically and say, well, we're just forcing people to work more. But through every one of these phases, right, we didn't have, sales automation tools 20, 30 years ago. But then when we brought them in, people's sales quotas went up. Just like with AI, people's sales quotas are going to go up. And so I think it's okay to expect people to produce more if you give them more help.
Right, exactly. I mean, like we've all heard the saying, or if you haven't, you'll hear here first, right? Like, so idle hands makes for the devil's workshop, right? So the more productive we are, the more time we have, we're either going to do one or two things. We're either going to become more productive or we're going to become stagnant. And so you only have two options, right? Like, because even staying the same is becoming stagnant. And so if I have more time, then I'm going to do one of two things. I'm going to become more productive via innovation. So I'm going to be able to innovate more. I'm going to be able to sell more. I'm going to be able to grow more, or I'm going to stay the same, which is going to put me behind because I'm going to be stagnant. And so you're going to go one of two ways. And so organizations that are forward thinking and wanting to grow, they're going to start to say, okay, we have all of this extra time because we've saved all this extra time. What markets do we grow into? How do we innovate? And the employees or the agents that are on the forefront of that cusp, right, of saying like they're early adopters and they're saying, okay, how does my role shift and how do I do more? How do I become more productive? They're going to be the ones that are on the forefront of that saying, okay, this is how my role shifts and this is how I can become more productive. This is how I can get my hands into more things inside of the organization. Or you're going to have a handful of people who say, okay, well, I got all this extra time. I guess I'll go to the beach. Right. And so I think it's a balance between that, right? Like it's a balance between, okay, I got all this extra time. And so now I do self-care things and I put me first, but then it's also, okay, what do I do with all the extra time where I can be more productive or innovative and think outside of the box and create new boxes, not just think outside of the box, but
I like
create
that.
new boxes. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're going to find, people going. So I'm excited about that.
Hey, and Juanita, I don't know how much you cover things at a market level, but what happens from here? Like when I look at the CX landscape today, and I guess I'm asking you from your customer's perspective, where are they gravitating? Because we've got the traditional vendors, think of Avaya, Genesis, Mitel. Then we've got all the CCaaS pure plays, nice, Five9, Talkdesk, companies like that. And then we've had the entry of all the UCaaS vendors, Ring, Zoom, WebEx, 8x8, those types of companies. And then we've got all these like specialty companies that have popped up, Sprinkler, Unifor, UJet, even, Verint to some degree is now more of a CCaaS provider than they were before. You got the CRM vendors coming in, and it seems like the number of customers hasn't grown, right? But the number of suppliers have. And I just don't see how there's enough supply or enough demand to meet the supply for all these vendors. And so where does this go?
I think that's a super excellent question because like that gets me super excited because I know from being a customer, right? So from being at the United Healthcares or the Walgreens
Yeah.
and so being a customer, being in workforce and being in operations, I know that many times there are multiple players. It's multiple players in these same companies,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes as an analyst, like we go to these different, we go to these AR events or we go to, the customer events and they're talking about, oh yeah, this is my customer. It's like, yeah, you and two other, they're the customer for two
Yeah.
others as well, right? And so what I think, the reason I bring that point up is because I believe is what's going to happen is that as these companies, these CCaaS companies begin to get more and more of these feature list, right, or outcomes on their list, that list shrinks, right? We consolidate, organizations are able to consolidate the vendors that they have inside of their organization because it's not, they're not picking 5 different vendors because they don't have anything else to do, right? They're picking 5 different vendors
Right.
because this one is really good at this one, this is really good at this, and this one is exceptional at this. But as these CCaaS or CRM companies begin to stretch across, right, the industry. So CRM is stretching into CCaaS realm and CCaaS is stretching into CRM realm and marketing and all those different things. And you'll see organizations start to consolidate the vendors that they have in their tech wheel, right? Or in their tech stack rather, right? As opposed to right now, the reason they have 4 or 5 of these competitors in their tech stack is because each of them do something very specifically genius in their lane of genius. But as those providers start to stretch across the industry, like I'm in CCaaS, I'm in marketing, I'm in CRM, then that will consolidate.
Yeah. So that's going to be great news for some companies, bad news for others. And I'm not asking you to pick winners and losers here, but what advice would you give the vendors? How do you rise above the noise of all these vendors trying to look the same, what do you, as a buyer, what do you look for? If you were to help a vendor consolidate down from 5 to, or 10 to 5 or 10 to 3 or whatever, what would you look for to help you make that decision?
So when I'm in these conversations, whether it's CIOs or the business user, right? Because that's typically who's at the table. It's either, the CIO, CTO, or the actual business user who's helping the CIO or CTO make those decisions. It's about, not only usability or compliance in many cases, like, okay, is this piece of technology compliant with whatever our compliance goals are? But also then where are we going in the future, and how can we consolidate tech stack if that is an actual business goal? And so if I'm talking to a vendor, if I'm putting my vendor hat on, I'm thinking, okay, what is the outcome that our buyer, who are we actually trying to target? And what is necessary for them to win in their industry? Case in point, if I'm talking to a healthcare organization, what's very necessary for them to win in their industry of patient care is going to be, okay, do I have, access to patient information? That's core and central to their industry in their field, as opposed to patients actually contacting me, right? It's more
Yeah.
so, do I actually have my patient information, HIPAA information, medicines, all of those different things. So if I'm a vendor and I'm thinking about the technology stack that a healthcare industry is going to need, I'm going to be thinking, okay, how do I make sure that my piece of technology is well integrated or very core to the technology that is going to be very important for this industry? And that's what I would focus on.
Yeah.
If
So
that
you're a big fan of the vertical companies taking an industry, a vertical approach.
I am, because I think that
Yeah.
when we're thinking about from a user, when we think about from a user perspective, that's what I care about,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if I'm the end user, I care about healthcare because I'm servicing healthcare people. I
Yeah.
don't care what the retail industry is doing. I don't care what the transportation industry is doing. I'm serving people from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah.
So
And from my perspective, what I always look for are, can you roll out some tangible use cases with real customers that show demonstrable ROI? I think a lot of times we get, very generic things like a company like this could do this. Well, show me a company that did it and what they got. Because I do know from the buyers that I talk to, especially with CIOs, they want to know what other companies like them have done, right?
mhm.
And so bring out those lighthouse accounts and and show us what that's like. So, all right, Juanita. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground. Anything else you want to add about 2025? What are you looking forward to most?
I think what I'm looking forward to most is how these roles shift, how companies are thinking about employee experience. I get into water all the time when I talk about, without an employee experience strategy, your CX strategy is trash. And I, because I think it's core to creating a good customer experience strategy. So I think employee experience is going to become that much more important. We're already seeing it pushed to the forefront of people's CX strategy. So I'm excited to really kind of see that a little bit more in 2025.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward more to just seeing the advancements of AI. I'm one of the things that concerns me though is every to the point you made at the beginning where consumer acceptance and demand goes up, every app we use is going to have some sort of virtual or some sort of AI interface to it, right? And so from a worker's perspective, what does this look like? Do I have 100 applications with 100 separate AI agents, and once they become agentic, then they start talking to me proactively, and so that's a lot of noise that I didn't have
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Yeah, and at reInvent, Vijay Pandey from Cisco actually brought up a topic where he's talking about the Internet of Agents, where these things need to be standardized and talk to each other. I don't think we're going to see that next year, but I do think it is something the vendor community should be thinking about. How do they create better interoperability across those agents? At least within CX, my CRM agent should be able to talk to my ZKast agent, should be able to talk to my workforce management agent, should be able to talk to my sales and marketing agent, right? And
Yes.
if you can't do that, you're going to create an overly complicated workforce, because we're going to have agent sprawl, I guess is the best way to describe that. So
That's really great. That's a really great
yeah.
insight. And I think it is so important. I mean, agents, not even just agents, but employees and just in general, right, get super overwhelmed when we have to have 50, 11 million is the number my grandmother used to say, apps or things that we have to manage. Our brain actually isn't wired to multitask. While we say we're multitasking, we actually literally are not multitasking. You're just context switching, right? So you're switching really
Yeah.
quickly. And so imagine all of those apps or all the different things that are now, I have to now manage and move between. And so I think the better we integrate and are able to move seamlessly, create that unified approach, then the better off agents, employees, consumers, businesses will be.
All right, Juanita Coley, then word of warning, don't have 50 million, 11, is that the right number? Agents on your
50, 11 million.
50, 11 million, okay. All right, so we got more acceptance, in fact, demand for AI agents. We've got more AI certainly coming, but don't forget about EX and try to create some interoperability. Do the world a little bit of a favor. I know we like our walled gardens, but man, it's time for those things to fall. So
Absolutely, you
yeah.
nailed it.
Okay, so pleasure having you on, Juanita. I hope we'll see you again on another episode. We'll see you next year at some events. On behalf of Juanita Coley from Solid Rock Consulting, I'm ZKast from ZK Research, saying thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button and give us a like. I'll see you next time on our next episode of ZKast. Thanks, Juanita.